Early in the morning, long before the sun had fully risen above the rooftops of London, the area around Buckingham Palace was already coming alive. It was the kind of morning when the city felt both calm and excited at the same time. A light breeze moved through the open courtyard in front of the palace, carrying the soft sounds of footsteps, conversations, and distant traffic. Even though it was early, a growing crowd of tourists was gathering, drawn by the promise of watching the famous changing of the guard ceremony. People from different countries, different languages, and different lifestyles all found themselves standing side by side, sharing the same curiosity. Some held cameras, some checked their phones for the schedule, and others simply looked around, admiring the grand structure of the palace. Its golden gates, tall windows, and elegant stone walls gave every visitor a sense of being somewhere important. Families stood together holding maps. Children pointed excitedly at the guards, standing in their bright uniforms. Elderly couples held hands as they searched for the best viewing spot. A few locals walked past, smiling gently at the wide-eyed tourists who looked like they were seeing a magical place for the first time. The morning sun reflected off the polished helmets of the guards, making them look almost unreal, like figures from a storybook. Among the growing crowd stood a group of tourists who were noticeably louder than everyone else. Their voices rose above the calm morning noise, making nearby visitors glance at them with brief curiosity. This group did not seem to share the gentle patience the rest of the crowd had. While most people respected the rope barriers placed across the courtyard, the group looked at them as if they were optional. They spoke excitedly, took pictures of themselves, and made playful jokes without paying much attention to the rules explained on the nearby signboards. A few stewards, dressed in neat uniforms and wearing friendly smiles, walked along the edges of the gathering crowd. Their job was to ensure everyone remained safe and that the ceremonial path stayed clear. They politely reminded visitors to stay behind the ropes and avoid blocking the space where the guards would march. Most people listened immediately, stepping back respectfully. But the louder group only nodded casually before going back to what they were doing. The atmosphere, however, remained cheerful. The palace courtyard had a special charm that made people naturally calm and curious. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, giggling. A couple from Japan quietly practiced their English phrases to ask someone to take a picture for them. A group of students from Spain discussed what they had read about the ceremony. An elderly man leaned on his walking stick, telling his granddaughter that he had visited the palace many years before, long before she was born. Slowly, the stewards began asking everyone to prepare, because the start of the ceremony was only a short time away. People moved closer, yet still controlled and respectful, making sure not to cross the ropes. The group of loud tourists also moved forward, but with less care. Their movements were sudden and quick, as if they were more interested in getting the closest spot than in watching the ceremony respectfully. When one of them leaned too far forward, a steward gently asked them to step back. They did so, but only after giving a half smile that suggested they were not taking the request seriously. The air shifted slightly as the crowd sensed something approaching. It wasn't loud, but there was a faint rhythm, soft, steady, and almost musical. The tourists at the back whispered excitedly. "They're coming," someone said. Phones were raised into the air. Cameras began recording. Everyone turned their eyes toward the far end of the road leading to the palace. The steady rhythm grew clearer. It was the sound of boots hitting the pavement in perfect unison. People stood straighter, some holding their breath in anticipation. The palace guards appeared at the end of the street, marching with flawless timing. Their red uniforms looked bright against the gray stone surroundings. Their tall black hats stood proudly, making them seem even taller than they already were. Each step they took was controlled, strong, and completely synchronized. It was a sight that impressed even those who had seen it many times before. As the guards approached, the atmosphere shifted from excitement to admiration. The crowd watched silently, respectful of the effort, discipline, and tradition represented in the marching. The guards walked past the visitors with absolute focus, their expressions calm and unreadable. Nothing seemed to distract them, not the cameras, not the whispers, not even the hundreds of eyes watching them at once. Most of the visitors remained behind the ropes, capturing pictures without disturbing anyone. But the louder group of tourists had a different reaction. Instead of admiring the sight from a respectful distance, they pushed slightly closer, trying to record the closest possible video. One of them even stretched their arm past the rope, hoping to get a better view through their phone's camera. A steward quickly noticed and politely asked them again to stay behind the boundary. The group stepped back for a moment, but as soon as the steward walked away, they leaned forward again, trying to get as close as they could. Their enthusiasm wasn't harmful, but it lacked awareness. They were too focused on capturing the perfect moment to notice the discomfort they were causing to others around them. A mother standing nearby gently moved her children away from them, not wanting them to get caught between the group's constant shifting. A couple exchanged a quiet glance, unsure why the group wasn't following the same rules as everyone else. Still, the rest of the crowd stayed calm, choosing to focus on the ceremony rather than the distraction. The guards continued their approach, their steps creating a strong, steady beat that echoed around the courtyard. The sound became more powerful as they drew nearer. People felt the ground vibrate slightly with each synchronized step. It was a moment that made visitors appreciate the precision and dedication of the ceremonial guards. The loud tourist group now seemed even more eager. One of them crouched low, trying to take a picture from below the rope. Another leaned sideways, almost bumping into a family trying to watch quietly. Their actions didn't cause harm, but they showed a lack of awareness of the respectful atmosphere the ceremony required. They treated the space like an amusement area, not understanding the seriousness of the tradition being performed. Still, even with these small interruptions, the crowd remained focused. The ceremony had a calming effect on people, drawing their attention back to the polished boots, the bright uniforms, and the slow, graceful movements of the guards. Tourists whispered softly to one another, expressing admiration for the sight. Cameras clicked gently. Some visitors simply put their devices down and watched with their own eyes, taking in every detail. As the guards reached the courtyard entrance, the stewards carefully walked along the rope boundary one last time, reminding people to remain behind the designated area. Most visitors nodded politely. The louder group gave a quick smile but did not step back very far. They remained excited, and although they weren't causing harm, their eagerness was beginning to feel out of place. Still, the overall mood of the courtyard remained peaceful, filled with excitement, respect, and curiosity. Everyone was waiting for the next part of the ceremony, and even though the group of loud tourists had begun to stand out, the true focus of the morning remained the historic tradition unfolding in front of them. The guards continued their movement with grace and discipline, and the crowd collectively leaned forward, not physically, but emotionally, as the ceremony prepared to enter its next phase. The morning sun continued to rise, casting a warm glow over the palace and the visitors. With each passing second, the atmosphere grew more meaningful, as if the courtyard itself understood the importance of what was about to happen. It was the beginning of a day many tourists would remember forever, a day that would become even more unforgettable soon. The atmosphere in the courtyard had reached a level of quiet excitement. Everyone felt the importance of the moment as the guards moved into their positions. Their steps were steady and strong, each one landing with a smooth confidence that made the entire courtyard feel like part of a larger, carefully timed performance. The visitors who had come to watch felt a mix of admiration and curiosity, and many people leaned forward slightly, eager to see every detail. The guards were now much closer, and the crowd could see the shine of their boots, the rich color of their uniforms, and the calm expression on their faces. Their focus was impressive. Even with hundreds of people watching, they did not look distracted. Their eyes stayed forward, their posture stayed perfect, and every motion seemed rehearsed 1,000 times. People admired this discipline. Some whispered to their friends, saying how amazing it was to see the ceremony in person. Others watched in complete silence, wanting to take in the moment without interruption. Most of the crowd continued to behave respectfully, staying behind the ropes as instructed. They held their cameras steady, not taking large steps or pushing each other. There was a peacefulness in the way the visitors absorbed the moment. But one group, the same louder tourists from earlier, stood out again. Their excitement had grown stronger as the guards came closer, and their desire to capture the best angle seemed to take over their understanding of the space. One person in the group kept leaning forward with their phone, stretching their arm far past the rope, even though the stewards had politely asked everyone to stay behind the boundary. Another member of the group whispered a plan to step closer for a clearer picture. Their conversation wasn't harmful, but it showed a lack of awareness of the respectful environment around them. The crowd nearby began noticing their behavior more clearly now. A few people exchanged soft glances, unsure of how to react. A mother gently pulled her child a little closer to her side. An older man lifted his eyebrows slightly, wondering why the group didn't understand the simple rules. But no one said anything. Most visitors did not want to create a scene. They only hoped the group would quietly step back on their own. Just then, the guards began forming a new line, adjusting their positions with graceful, smooth movements. The sunlight glimmered on their polished buttons and helmets. The rhythmic sound of their steps echoed gently across the courtyard. Everyone was captivated by the performance, except the louder tourist group. Their excitement pushed them forward again. One of them stepped closer until their foot almost touched the rope. Another stretched their arm out, leaning into the open space where the guards were about to walk. In their eagerness, they failed to notice how close they were coming to the marching path. A steward noticed the movement and quickly walked toward them. He wore a calm but firm expression, the kind you see on someone who wants to correct a situation before it becomes a problem. He approached the group with a friendly tone, reminding them once again to step back. The group nodded politely, stepping away for a few seconds. But as the steward moved on to help another part of the crowd, the group drifted forward again. Their attention was glued to their phones and cameras, and they seemed unaware of how many people were beginning to feel uneasy nearby. Then it happened. As the guards shifted formation, one member of the group leaned in far too close. Without thinking, they lifted their phone high above their head and stepped past the rope, not by a large distance, but far enough that it clearly crossed the boundary. The moment was brief, but it was noticeable. The crowd inhaled sharply, not out of fear, but out of surprise. Everyone could see how unaware the tourist was of how close they had come to the ceremonial path. At that exact moment, one guard turned slightly, as part of the formation shift. His attention stayed strictly forward, but he had sensed the movement from the corner of his eye. The guard planted his foot down with a strong, firm step, one that echoed slightly louder than the others. It was not meant to alarm, but simply to establish clear presence. Then, in a clear, controlled voice that carried across the courtyard, the guard spoke. "Please stand back." The words were not shouted harshly, nor were they angry. They were simply firm, official, and unmistakably clear. The tone was respectful, steady, and authoritative, designed to protect the order of the ceremony and ensure everyone's safety. The courtyard fell into instant silence. Even the birds seemed to pause in the middle of their morning songs. The group of louder tourists froze in place, their excitement suddenly replaced by surprise. The person who had stepped forward quickly moved back behind the rope, their face turning slightly pink from embarrassment. They hadn't meant to cause trouble. They had simply been caught up in the moment, without thinking. The crowd watched quietly, not judgmentally, but with a sort of understanding. Everyone recognized that the guard had spoken only to maintain the ceremony's order. It was his duty, and he had carried it out with professionalism and calmness. The guard did not look at the tourist. He did not break formation or shift his expression. He simply returned to his position, continuing the ceremony without hesitation. His discipline impressed the visitors even more now. They admired how calmly he handled the situation, how steady his voice had been, and how smoothly he returned to his duties. The tension in the air gently faded. People began to breathe normally again. Some nodded quietly in appreciation of the guards' professionalism. Others offered small smiles to each other, relieved that the moment had passed without any real trouble. The tourist who had stepped forward looked around with a shy, uncomfortable smile. Their friends whispered to them, perhaps reminding them to be more careful. The rest of the group became much quieter than before. Their excitement had softened into a more respectful curiosity. The steward, who had noticed the interaction from a distance, walked over again. This time, the group listened carefully as he kindly reminded them to enjoy the ceremony from behind the ropes. They nodded sincerely, showing genuine understanding. The ceremony continued beautifully. The guards moved with the same grace, precision, and rhythm as before. Their calm professionalism reassured the visitors and restored the peaceful atmosphere. The gentle sound of boots on stone echoed once more, guiding the attention of the audience back to the performance. A little girl nearby whispered to her father, asking what had happened. Her father leaned down and quietly explained that the guard had simply reminded someone to keep a safe distance. The little girl nodded thoughtfully, understanding that even a small reminder could be important when many people were gathered in one place. From that moment onward, the tourist group behaved more carefully. They stayed behind the rope, held their cameras at a safer angle, and observed the ceremony with newfound appreciation. It seemed they finally understood how meaningful the moment was, not just a chance for a picture, but a tradition that deserved respect. The rest of the crowd, now relaxed again, continued enjoying the ceremony in peace. The guards' clear instruction had not disrupted the performance. Instead, it had reminded everyone of the importance of boundaries and order. The event flowed smoothly once again, with visitors smiling, admiring, and quietly recording the ceremony. Every step the guards took carried an air of dignity, and the sense of respect in the courtyard grew stronger. As the performance continued, the earlier moment began to feel like a gentle reminder rather than a disruption. A reminder of how traditions deserve space. A reminder of how easily excitement can blur awareness. And most importantly, a reminder of how calm professionalism can restore balance in an unexpected moment. The ceremony carried forward with renewed harmony, and every visitor, including the once loud tourists, now enjoyed it with deeper appreciation. The courtyard slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm after the guards' clear and calm instruction. Although the moment had surprised everyone, the atmosphere quickly softened again. People resumed watching the ceremony with fresh attention, now even more aware of the discipline and focus required from the guards. The steady sound of boots on the ground filled the open space once more, and the sunlight continued to brighten the palace walls. The group of tourists who had stepped too close remained noticeably quieter than before. Their earlier excitement had changed into a more thoughtful silence. The person who had accidentally crossed the rope looked down at their phone, not out of embarrassment alone, but because they finally realized how important it was to respect the rules. Their friends exchanged soft whispers, probably reminding each other to be more careful from now on. Meanwhile, the rest of the crowd reacted in their own quiet ways. Some people smiled gently, relieved that the moment had passed calmly. Others nodded to themselves, impressed by how professionally the guard had handled the situation. The guard had not shown any irritation or frustration. His tone had been even, steady, and respectful. That simple moment taught many visitors that even in a ceremonial role, the guards carried a strong sense of responsibility. A mother standing with her children knelt down and whispered a gentle explanation. She told them that the guards were trained to maintain order and safety, and that the brief instruction had only been to protect the process of the ceremony. The children listened with wide eyes, understanding more about the discipline they were witnessing. A little boy even whispered, "They are very brave," which made the mother smile softly. In another corner of the crowd, an elderly couple stood quietly, their hands clasped together. They had seen the ceremony several times over the years, but this time felt different. The grandmother leaned slightly toward her partner and said quietly that she admired the guard's calmness. The grandfather nodded, agreeing that the situation had been handled with dignity. They both returned to watching the ceremony with deep respect in their eyes. Nearby, a group of college students from another country whispered among themselves. One of them said that it was easy to forget how much training went into being a guard. Another mentioned how impressive it was to see the ceremony in person, rather than on a screen. They all agreed that the atmosphere carried a sense of quiet pride that was difficult to describe. The ceremony continued, and the guards moved into their next formation. Each motion was smooth and graceful. Their steps remained perfectly synchronized, showing no sign of the brief interruption. It seemed as though the guards had practiced these routines countless times, and their professionalism allowed them to remain focused in any situation. Their calm demeanor added a sense of admiration to the air, making the visitors appreciate the ceremony even more. Meanwhile, the group of earlier tourists tried their best to blend back into the crowd. They stood behind the rope now, holding their cameras at a safe distance. Their movements were slower and more respectful. One of them even lowered their phone completely, deciding to experience the moment through their own eyes rather than through a screen. They quietly admitted to their friend that the ceremony looked more beautiful when watched without distraction. A steward approached them again, not to correct them, but simply to check on the crowd's comfort. He offered a polite smile and asked if they were enjoying the ceremony. The group nodded sincerely, showing genuine appreciation. One of them even thanked the steward for explaining the rules earlier. The steward smiled in return, grateful for their understanding, and continued walking along the boundary to ensure everything remained safe and orderly. As the ceremony progressed, people's attention gradually shifted away from the earlier moment. Instead, they focused on the music that gently flowed through the courtyard as the band played. The soft melodies blended with the rhythmic marching, creating a peaceful harmony that touched everyone present. Visitors felt almost as if they had stepped into a different time, one where traditions and discipline played a central role. Families listened to the music with smiles. Couples leaned closer to one another, sharing the special experience. Children swayed gently, fascinated by the uniforms and instruments. The entire scene felt warm and welcoming, as if the palace itself was inviting each visitor to enjoy its timeless charm. Toward the back of the courtyard, a group of friends started discussing the beauty of the ceremony. One of them pointed out the guards' polished uniforms. Another admired the formation patterns they created as they marched. A third said they appreciated how calmly the earlier situation had been handled. Their conversation reflected the respect and admiration many people felt at that moment. The once loud tourist group continued to stand quietly, observing the ceremony in a calmer mindset. They seemed to understand the importance of the tradition now. One of them whispered softly that they should follow the rules more carefully in places like this. The earlier moment had turned into a gentle life lesson, one about patience, awareness, and respect for shared spaces. As the guards completed their next movement, the courtyard filled with another wave of soft applause from a few sections of the crowd. The applause was not loud, but warm and appreciative. It was their way of expressing gratitude for the effort and dedication that went into the ceremony. The guards did not react to the applause, remaining focused on their duties, which only made the visitors admire them more. A young tourist standing near the earlier group overheard their quiet conversation and offered them a kind smile. They returned the smile with visible relief, grateful for the understanding. The small exchange showed how easily a moment of misunderstanding could turn into a moment of human connection. The guard who had given the gentle instruction earlier remained steady in his position. His calm posture reflected his training and discipline. Although he had spoken only one sentence, his words had reminded everyone of the boundary that ensured the ceremony could continue smoothly. Many people found themselves quietly grateful for his role. As the ceremony prepared to reach its final section, the steward walked toward the center edge and encouraged everyone to stay in place until the guards completed their movement. The crowd cooperated smoothly. Even the earlier group listened attentively now, showing genuine respect. They held their cameras steady, but did not lean forward or step out of place. More people joined the spectators during this time, drawn by the sound of the band or the sight of the crowd. Those who arrived late stood behind others, trying not to disturb anyone's view. The atmosphere felt united strangers from different backgrounds, sharing the same moment of admiration. The guard's earlier instruction had subtly changed the energy of the crowd, but in a positive way. People now paid even closer attention to their surroundings. Parents held their children's hands a little more carefully. Tourists watched their footing near the rope. Everyone seemed more aware of the space and the respect it deserved. As the band played the final notes of their piece, a soft hush fell over the courtyard again. The guards prepared for their final march, moving with the same precision they had shown throughout the morning. Their synchronized steps formed patterns that mesmerized the visitors, who watched with eager fascination. When the final formation completed, someone whispered, "Beautiful," and many people silently agreed. The ceremony had offered them not only entertainment, but also a moment of calm reflection. The earlier group of tourists looked around, realizing how much they had learned in just a short amount of time. They had come for pictures, for excitement, and for fun. But now, they understood the deeper meaning behind the ceremony, the dedication, the discipline, and the quiet respect that kept the tradition alive. Their excitement had transformed into appreciation, and the crowd, once surprised, now fully relaxed, welcomed the sense of unity that spread across the courtyard as the ceremony approached its closing moments. As the ceremony moved toward its final moments, the atmosphere in the courtyard was filled with a gentle sense of admiration. What had begun as a lively morning filled with excitement was now turning into a calm, reflective experience for everyone present. The visitors who had gathered to witness the changing of the guard felt grateful to be part of a tradition that carried so much history and meaning. The morning sunlight rested softly on the palace walls, giving the entire place a warm and peaceful glow. The guards continued their movements with the same steady rhythm they had displayed since the beginning. Their boots touched the ground in a way that felt almost musical, strong, clear, and perfectly in sync. The final arrangements of the formations showed the precision they had practiced countless times. Even though they had performed the ceremony many times before, each step carried a sense of respect and pride. The band played the last few notes of their piece, and the melodies floated through the courtyard like a gentle breeze. People listened quietly, feeling the calmness of the moment. Children who had been excited earlier now stood still, mesmerized by the beauty of the music. Adults smiled softly, enjoying the harmony of the instruments. It was the kind of moment that made people forget about time, responsibilities, and worries, even if only for a while. The group of tourists who had earlier stepped too close to the guards also stood in admiration. They watched the ceremony with a new appreciation in their eyes. Their earlier excitement had been replaced by a thoughtful calmness. Instead of trying to capture everything on their phones, they now held their cameras at their sides, wanting to experience the moment fully. What had happened earlier had taught them something valuable, not just about rules, but about consideration. As the guards finished the last steps of the ceremony, the courtyard became even quieter. It was as if the entire crowd understood the importance of letting the final moments unfold peacefully. The guards lifted their heads slightly, the sunlight shining on the metal details of their uniforms. Their expressions remained focused, calm, and proud. Each of them held a presence that made the visitors feel the weight of tradition and dedication behind the ceremony. When the final march began, the visitors watched with full attention. The guards moved with flawless timing, creating patterns that were both simple and beautiful. As they marched toward the exit route, the audience followed them with their eyes, trying to capture every detail before the ceremony ended. After the last line of guards passed, a soft wave of applause spread across the courtyard. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, just a gentle, appreciative sound that reflected the visitors' respect. The applause seemed to say, "Thank you," without needing words. Some people clapped with wide smiles, Others clapped quietly with peaceful expressions. The guards did not react, as was expected. They continued their march, focused and composed. As they exited the main courtyard area, their silhouettes shrank slowly in the distance, leaving behind a courtyard filled with a sense of calm accomplishment. Once the ceremony was fully complete, the visitors slowly began to move. People stretched their legs, relaxed their shoulders, and turned to their families and friends to share their thoughts. The courtyard, which had been filled with stillness moments earlier, now buzzed gently with polite conversations, soft laughter, and thoughtful comments. The group of earlier tourists gathered together and took a deep breath. One of them spoke quietly, saying they hadn't expected the ceremony to feel so meaningful. Another added that they felt grateful that the guard had reminded them earlier in such a calm way. They all agreed it had helped them understand the seriousness of the tradition. It became clear to them that the ceremony was not just a tourist attraction, it was a symbol of discipline, history, and respect. A few people nearby overheard their thoughtful words and smiled. It was nice to see that the earlier moment had turned into something positive, helping the tourists see the ceremony with fresh eyes. A steward approached them again, this time offering a friendly nod. He seemed pleased to see how respectfully they were behaving now. The group smiled back, appreciative of his patience and guidance. Families slowly began taking photos near the palace gates. Couples held hands as they walked away, talking about their favorite parts of the ceremony. Children asked questions, curious to know more. Visitors from other countries shared their impressions with one another, discussing how the ceremony compared to traditions in their own cultures. The courtyard felt like a place where people from different parts of the world could connect through a shared moment of admiration. A young tourist approached the rope boundary, not to cross it but simply to take one last picture from the proper distance. They turned to their parent and said they wanted to learn more about the guards later. The parent smiled and agreed, saying that understanding the history behind the ceremony would make the experience even more special. An elderly couple stood off to the side, enjoying the peacefulness that followed the event. They talked softly about how each visit to the palace brought a new memory. Even though they had seen the ceremony many times, it never lost its charm. The grandfather mentioned how calm and respectful the guard had been earlier. The grandmother nodded and said that moments like those showed the true professionalism of the guards. The earlier group of louder tourists now walked with a more thoughtful pace. They took a group photo, but this time, they stood behind the ropes, smiling calmly. One of them said they were glad the morning had turned out the way it did because they had learned something valuable. Another jokingly said they would be more careful around important traditions from now on. Their laughter was gentle and warm, showing how much their perspective had changed. As the crowd slowly thinned, the courtyard returned to its usual, quieter self. Birds flew across the open space. The palace gates stood proudly in the sunlight. A few visitors lingered behind, enjoying the architecture and reading the signs that explained the history of the ceremony. For some people, the entire experience would become a cherished memory. They would go home and tell their families about the precision and beauty of the ceremony. They would share photos and stories about the guards' dedication. For others, the morning would serve as a gentle reminder of the importance of awareness and respect in shared spaces. The louder tourists also carried something meaningful with them. What had felt like a simple reminder earlier had turned into a moment of personal growth. They now understood that their excitement should never overshadow respect for rules and traditions. They walked away with smiles, grateful for the peaceful guidance they had received rather than feeling embarrassed. The guard who had given the gentle instruction earlier continued with his duties elsewhere. Though he didn't know it, his calm and respectful words had touched many people in the courtyard. His voice had not only corrected a moment of confusion, it had taught an entire group of visitors a valuable lesson about patience, awareness, and respect. As the visitors left the palace area, the morning transformed into midday. The sun rose higher in the sky, brightening the streets around the palace. The excitement of the morning ceremony slowly blended with the everyday rhythm of the city. People boarded buses, walked toward the nearby park, or started exploring other parts of London. But the memory of the ceremony remained with them. The sound of the boots, the sight of the uniforms, the calm reminder from the guard, the applause, the music, all of it formed a story they would remember for many years. The courtyard had been the stage of both tradition and gentle human learning. And for the visitors who were there that day, especially the tourists who had stepped too close earlier, the experience had grown into something deeper than they expected. It wasn't just a performance. It was a lesson in respect, calmness, and understanding. A moment that showed how even a small reminder, given kindly, could create a meaningful change. In the end, everyone left the palace with something valuable. Some left with beautiful photographs. Some left with a deeper appreciation for tradition. Some left with a new understanding of rules and respect. And everyone left with a memory that would stay with them. A memory of a morning filled with harmony, learning, and quiet beauty.